Okay, sure, sure.
Fine, go.
Yeah. Hi, Steve. Welcome to Radio Sophia. It is a community-based platform, and we use this platform for sharing of knowledge, for exchanging ideas. So we are very glad to have you here. Uh, s- Everyone who is present on this particular talk, thank you for joining in. Dr. Steve Joordens is formally trained as a cognitive psychologist, and first and foremost, he's a teacher and a researcher. He has been teaching at University of Toronto, Scarborough since 1995, and his primary area of expertise is in the field of memory, attention, and cognition. So he was trained as a cognitive psychologist, but since past many years, he has also shifted his attention to the field of educational psychology. He is now also director of Advanced Learning Technologies Lab and is also an ed entrepreneur. So he is active in the field of ed tech, and Peer Scholar is one of the technological platforms that he has helped to develop and he has helped to spread it. So it's a platform that supports the development of core skills which are required in teaching. For instance, critical thinking skills or creative skills, and typically very useful in especially large classroom settings. Apart from being a very active researcher, being a very active entrepreneur, and being a teacher, he is also someone who is involved in online lectures. So he also takes classes for edX, other MOOCs like Coursera, and he's also someone who has given keynote addresses, panel. He's been a panelist, a moderator. So definitely a very multifaceted, interesting profile. And we hope to learn a lot from you, Steve. Thank you for accepting our invitation. The topic for talk today is dreams. Definitely a very, very interesting topic and a very, very interesting title, because the title of the topic of the talk is the science of dreams. And dreams is typically associated with something that is mystical, something which is surreal, right? So I was reminded of surrealist paintings when we talk of dreams, right? Dreams was a major motif in their works. Now, when there is something which is so surreal, something which is so mystical, so enigmatic, how do you develop a scientific way of understanding and exploring that particular phenomena? So a very interesting title, and also a very interesting footnote of the title, wherein is it some unconscious desire which is very psychoanalytic in its orientation, versus something which is very very positivist way of looking at it? Is it just simple random brain activation, right? So two very different perspectives, both coming from the field of psychology. And I'm very sure there are many different perspectives in the field of psychology, which you would be introducing us to. So this is broadly introducing Steve and introducing the topic. The session would be organized as follows. So Steve would be talking with us for maybe 35, 40 minutes or so. And then we can throw open the talk for Q&A session, which I'll be moderating. Thank you, Steve. Over to you.
Thank you, Bress. I appreciate that very much, and it's a fantastic introduction. It's really great to be with all of you today, and yeah, this is the fun we're going to have. I think Perez kind of laid it up really beautifully that psychology likes to study things that some people might call mysterious, some people might call spiritual, but if they're part of the human experience, we want to understand them. But of course, we also want to do stuff in as scientific an approach as possible. And so that is the challenge in a lot of areas, like dreams and sleep more generally. And that's the story I want to tell you. So I look forward to doing so. Let's jump right in. Okay, sorry, it just says the host has disabled screen sharing for me. So maybe if you can enable that on your side, please.
Yeah, I think now you can.
Okay, good. Whoa. Okay, so you're seeing my screen right now. Yeah. The first thing I just wanted to show you, just to let you guys know, because we're all going through this terrible COVID situation, is I've created a free online course on Coursera called Mind Control: Managing Your Mental Health During COVID. It's actually very popular in India. It's more popular there than everywhere. But you see, about 144,000 people have gone through it. And it's gotten some really good reviews. So if you are struggling at all with anxiety during this time, or others that are, please feel free to recommend the course. From what I hear, it's been a big help to many people. Okay, so I'll just mention that quickly, and let's get to the task at hand then. All right. So yeah, I do want to tell you this bigger story, and I do really want to begin with this notion that all through the history of psychology, there's been this battle of sorts where psychology as a new discipline, when it first began in the late 1800s, was really trying very hard to show itself to be a scientific discipline, to suggest that we could understand things like the human experience, human consciousness, and yes, even dreams, perhaps using a scientific approach. But all through the history of psychology, when psychoanalysis especially started, it was not very scientific, but it became a big part of psychology. And so psychology has always had this battle to be as scientific as possible. And a lot of that comes down to the challenge in psychology over objective measurement. Like, unlike physics or chemistry, physics and chemistry, you can often directly measure the behavior you're interested in. Imagine something moving down an inclined plane. You can measure its speed, you can measure its acceleration, or in a chemical process, you can measure how much of various chemicals are there in some solution. And so you can really directly measure what you're interested in. But in psychology, we're interested in things like attention and memory and perception and consciousness. And those are not things we can see directly and measure directly. And so the challenge is, can you do good science despite that? And this is partly the story I want to tell you today. We're going to tell it. I'm going to kind of sneak into the dream part. We're going to get there near the end of this. I want to bring you to that by talking about the more general issue of sleep first, and to show you how the study of sleep kind of opened the door to coming up with some ways of thinking about how we could study dreams. Let me step back for a moment and just say this. This is one of the controversial things I often say to my classes. I say, you'll sometimes hear physics, chemistry, things like that being called the hard sciences, and psychology being called a soft science. And they call it that for exactly the reason I just described, that it's harder to measure things objectively. But what I tell my students is, in fact, physics and chemistry are the easy sciences because you can measure everything directly. You can capture them in simple mathematical formulas. If you want a challenge as a scientist, psychology is the challenging science. You have to be clever. You have to be able to be more of a detective, looking at the traces of something and the data it leaves behind. And that's part of the story I want to tell you today, is how people kind of met some of these challenges, came up with interesting research designs, and ultimately gave us a better idea about the question at hand: why do we dream? So let's start with, why do we sleep? And one of the places we often start is just by showing that, it's unclear why we spend a third of our life. So think of that for a moment. A third of our life we spend laying down in this completely prone position where almost any animal in the world could probably kill us very easily if it could just sneak up on us, right? Because we're just sitting there basically saying, hey, kill me. I'm not paying attention. My mind is somewhere else, etc. It seems like a funny thing to do, to spend a third of your life in this defenseless state. So it must be important, right? We wouldn't do that. We wouldn't have evolved to do that if it wasn't important for some reason. But why is it important? And this is still a challenge for us to understand. We do know that if people do not get enough sleep, we see almost immediately all sorts of issues that arise. Impaired cognition, your ability to think deeply about things, complex thoughts, immediately starts to be impaired if you get sleep deprived. You have higher levels of anxiety. You become a little bit more emotional in general. Stroke risk of diabetes. You see all of these physical. If you don't get sleep, we see all of these physical sorts of things: heart disease, weight gain, increased risk of breast cancer. So we're seeing it at the cognitive level, and we're seeing it at the biological level, that sleep really seems important. Okay, so we would like to understand it better. Well, for many years, it was a mystical thing. People closed their eyes, and what happened? You can't speak to them, right? This is the objective measurement part. Psychology was having enough of a challenge trying to understand the experiences of people who are awake and alert and who could tell us about those experiences. But when somebody's asleep, they can't even do that. And so how do we get a sense of what's going on? Okay, this is part of the constantly evolving story of psychology. the fact that at certain points in history, certain tools become available, and those tools allow us to do research in ways we couldn't do it before. And an important tool for sleep research was the electrocephalogram. And you've seen EEG nets, these are called. They're kind of like bathing caps almost, but you put it over a person's whole head like that. And it includes all of these various electrodes. Now, electrodes, I always thought that that was the wrong word. And because they're not really, I mean, electrodes sounds like some sort of, I don't know, science fiction thing. What those really are little tiny microphones. This is a whole head full of little tiny microphones. And those microphones literally measure the static of the brain. The brain is an electrochemical system. We are completely electrochemical systems. But as messages are sent in the brain, they're sent by releasing certain neurotransmitters which have charges associated with them, positive charges or negative charges. And as signals are sent through the brain, there is an actual sound of electricity, kind of like when you turn a radio up if it wasn't on a station and you get that shh kind of sound, that pink noise or that white noise. The brain is constantly kind of emitting the sound as it's processing. And so you can measure that sound as these little waves, literally the amplitude of the sound over time. Okay. And so this is kind of interesting. As people started basically listening to the brain, they were finding all sorts of things that would change these waves. If somebody was paying attention to something, the waves were a little different than if they weren't paying attention. But then they also brought it into the sleep world. And it really opened up our studies of sleep. So here's what was found with sleep. This sort of fascinating notion that there is not just one thing called sleep. There seems to be these specific stages that are a little different from one another. Some of them not all that different from each other, but some of them quite dramatically different. So just to walk you through the story a little bit, and let's just start over here, and we'll go to the right in a moment. When you go to sleep at night, your brain waves are originally these. So what we're looking at here is it's low frequency. They're short waves. They don't ever go very high. Sorry, high frequency, low amplitude is what I meant. They're low amplitude. So they're not spiking very high, but they're all kind of crunched in there real tight. So these high frequency, low amplitude waves that we often call alpha, sorry, in this case, they're calling them beta waves here. The alphas are sneaking in. This is sort of what our brain looks like when we're awake and alert. And so as we're going to sleep, we're kind of still in that awake and alert stage. But now as we start to actually sleep, we're starting to sort of fade, that point where you fade into sleep. Now what we see is the amplitude of the waves get a little bigger. The frequency gets a little smaller. And on the behavioral side, this is where we're starting to see that the breathing get very patterned, what we call it, just regular. The heart rate is slowing down. We're seeing the body temperature decrease, etc. And now we're getting into stage 3 sleep. And this is really where we're getting into the deeper sleep. And so it's kind of like 2 levels of really deep sleep. Stage 3, we're seeing again higher amplitude and much lower frequency. So the brain's getting a little quieter, but it's got just these sort of loud spikes along the way. But overall, it's stretching out. And this is what we call deep sleep. Brain begins to generate these slow, and we call these delta waves. And these are really big delta waves here. So stage 4, this is very deep sleep. And this is where we have the very high amplitude waves, very low frequency, rhythmic breathing, limited muscle activity. The muscles start to get paralyzed during this, which is one of the fun things we're going to talk about here in a moment. And yeah, we're seeing these sorts of waves. And then something kind of dramatic happens. This is where dreams are going to begin. So after we've kind of gone through that deep stage, now we come to this stage where the brain pattern starts to look a whole lot like it did over here. It looks like the awake pattern, high frequency, low amplitude. And we also see what we call rapid eye movements. You're going to see on this one, we're labeling things REM. That's rapid eye movement. So literally, when someone sleeps, you start to see their eyes move under their eyelids. And we call that rapid eye movement. When you see that in somebody, and if you wake them up, they will tell you they were dreaming. Okay, this is the stage associated with dreaming. So anytime you wake somebody up there, they will tell you about the dream that's happening. Um, there's an interesting thing here that I want to sort of highlight to start you thinking, and that is that paralysis that occurs. Somewhere around the end of stage 4, your brain releases chemicals that literally paralyze your body. And it does so because when you start dreaming, if this did not happen, you would act out your dreams. Your body would move with whatever you're thinking in your mind. And this happens for some people. For some people, this paralysis process, this paralysis process is, it doesn't work right. And they thrash around in their dreams. You do not want to be in bed with one of these people because they will hit you and they will kick you and etc. And so there's part of that that's going to be important when we start saying, what do dreams mean? I can give you a taste of an answer to that question right now. Many dreams, some of the scary dreams, involve feelings of being slow, not being able to run away from something very quickly, or even feeling like you're laying there with a weight on your chest and you can't even get up. So you have the slow, lethargic feeling to you. Those dreams are probably because your brain is sensing the paralysis. It's sensing that, in fact, you can't move. Your muscles are paralyzed. And so part of that comes in, but it comes into your dream as these other things, like not being able to run away very quickly or having a weight on your chest and you can't get up. And so this is going to give us a hint already, maybe where I'll be going with the dream thing. But that's a taste. Okay. Just to kind of finish up this part so we have it clear, there are these 5 stages, but the other interesting thing is we go through these 5 and then we go back to the beginning. Well, sort of to the beginning. Let's do it this way because this is a better sense of it. We start with the light sleep, but then we go down, say, to stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. So we're in very deep sleep here, stage 4, and then we jump up to REM, maybe hitting a stage 2 along the way. Like maybe we stop a little bit for a bit of light sleep, but then we get to the REM sleep, the dream. And again, we're back to the alpha waves by that point in time. That's one cycle. And you see this first cycle seem to take, almost 2 hours, a little less than 2 hours. And then we go through the cycle again. Now we may skip some steps. So here it shows them it's 2 and he kind of skips 3 and goes right to deep sleep and then comes up through 3 and 2. So just to give you a sense that there's a little bit of variability to this, but basically we're going through these cycles over and over through the night. And as we go through the cycles, one thing you notice is the proportion of time we spend dreaming gets larger and larger and larger. So early in the night, it seems like the stage 4 sleep is important and we get lots of that. But once we've had enough of that, we don't really come back to that anymore. It's kind of like we need that at first, but once we get that, we don't do the deep, deep sleep so much. And as the night wears on, we're in a more shallow sleep and we're spending a whole lot more time dreaming. This is also why, by the way, if you ever sleep in, like on a weekend, you probably find you're dreaming a lot when you wake up, because as you go through the night and sleep longer, you're dreaming a lot, and there's a good chance that you will wake up from a dream, which is a good thing, by the way. When we wake up from a dream, we tend to feel the most refreshed. If you wake up here when you're in very deep sleep, if your alarm clock goes off and you're in very deep sleep, this is a horrible place to wake up from, because it's like your brain and body are so far away from reality. And you also have some of that paralysis in your muscles. And so when you wake up, you feel heavy and tired and horrible. And so, that's just, if you ever feel that way, that's probably why, because you woke up from a very deep sleep. Okay, there's so many things to talk about in the sleep and dream world. I always have to kind of tell myself, move on. We'll get to dreams. So let's move on and get to dreams, and let's talk about this issue then. Again, how do you scientifically study it? So we're already ahead a little bit, right? So we can now know when somebody's dreaming, and really nicely, we see this outward objective event, rapid eye movements. So we can now, with some sort of scientific precision, know when somebody is dreaming. And so we can watch them as they sleep, we can measure their brain waves, and we can have something tell us, oh, they're dreaming now. Now, why is that important? Because you can do something really kind of mean to them then. You can wake them up. Okay, so let's just do this. This notion of dream deprivation. It was pioneered by William Dement, and he was just interested. People dream a whole lot, and he thought, well, what would happen if you prevented people from dreaming? Okay, so the scientific approach to this. So let's think about it. What happens here now is we have a person and they go through the sleep. They're in a sleep lab. So we're monitoring all their sleep. They go down, they have a nice deep sleep. They come up and they start dreaming. And we go, hey, wake up. And they're like, what? And then we just say, nothing, go back to sleep. But when you do that, they don't continue with their dream thing. If you wake them up right here, they kind of go to this side and they start to go back down to deep sleep again. And then they'll come back up and they'll hit a dream. They'll start dreaming. We'll go, hey, wake up. And we'll wake them up and then they'll go back down. And when you do this, you can allow them to have a full night's sleep. So they can sleep for the full 8 hours, but you prevent them from dreaming. You deprive them of dreaming. So you're not depriving them of sleep. You're just depriving them of dreaming. And that's the technique this guy started. Okay, so I just walked you through it with the other one. I don't need that one. I wanted to show you something. Hey, where's my... Sorry, I'm going to take a quick look. I had another slide in there. A slide that told you what happened if you were deprived of dreaming. So it's really interesting. I think I still have it here. Sorry. Excuse me, but I think I still have it sitting right in my ridiculously too many tabs thing here. This is how I live. And I just want to show it to you if it is right there. Because it's important. These are other things I've stolen. Okay, here we are. So yeah, we'll just look at it here. I thought I'd pasted this in, but this is fine. So day one, if somebody is not dreaming, they have difficulty focusing their eyes. Just kind of weird, but not much. But day two, we start to see moodiness. And again, this difficulty focusing their eyes. Day three is where things start to get a little strange. This person's showing irritability, memory lapses, and they start to have hallucinations. Why do you hallucinate? Simply because we're not allowing you to dream. And then on day four, they have real hallucinations. And what we mean by real hallucinations is on day three, they're kind of like, hey, I'm seeing these weird little things, but they kind of know that what they're seeing isn't true. Day four, they start to feel like they're true. The hallucinations feel real. And by day five, people are almost schizophrenic. They're starting to have paranoid delusions that people are out to get them, etc. They're still having all sorts of hallucinations. So, fascinating. What is going on here? We don't have a clear answer to what dreams are about, but again, just like sleep, they seem really important to our cognitive stability, to our ability to kind of interpret what's really out there in the world and make sense of it. And when we don't get our dreams, that starts to fall apart. This is why, by the way, some of you might say, I don't dream. And I say, yeah, you do. I bet you do. You probably don't know you dream because you probably typically wake up in some stage other than sleep. Or other than the dream stage, you probably have a tendency to wake up from one of these light stages. And so when you wake up, you don't remember your dream. But I assure you that if we were to put an EEG on you, we would see times when you're dreaming. And if we woke you up in one of these times, you would report a dream. As far as we know, everybody dreams, because as far as we know, if you didn't dream, you go insane. So kind of interesting. There's going to be a little bit of this in this talk. Why? We don't know yet. This is a hard area to study, and we're kind of digging our way in. But let's walk through this a little bit more. The other thing we know when you interrupt dreams, and this is sort of a point about sleep in general. I've talked about interrupting REM sleep. You can also interrupt deep sleep in the same way. Just when they get to deep sleep, you can wake them up and then they go back shallow again. And so we can look at the differences between interrupting the dreams or interrupting the deep sleep. And one of the things people have looked at is the effect sleep has on learning. it seems as though when we learn things through the day, then when we sleep, the word we use is consolidate that learning. Somehow that learning becomes stronger after a good night's sleep. And it seems like depending on what you're learning, different parts of sleep are important. So specifically, if you're learning information, like students studying for an exam, when they study really hard all day, they need deep sleep to consolidate that learning. If you interrupt their deep sleep, so if we have two groups of participants now, one that we allow to get deep sleep and another that we don't, and they both do some learning before they sleep, and then we test them the next day on what they learned, the ones that are allowed deep sleep will show a lot better performance. They will have remembered that information. But if we interrupt deep sleep for people, then they have less memory for information. However, if we interrupt their dreams, that doesn't affect their memory for information. It does affect their memory or their learning of skills, though. When we're learning motor behaviors, whatever it may be, let's say you're learning a new sport or a musical instrument or a dance or whatever it may be, something that involves moving the body in certain ways, those are skills. And we know that dreams rather, are really important for the learning of skills. If you interrupt people's dreams, they don't learn skills so well. So that's something we've learned along the way with these deprivation studies. Kind of interesting. Okay, so now let's get to the real subject of this talk and dreams itself. Dreams is another level of difficulty to study, right? Sleep itself is hard because it's hard to know what's going on in the mind. But dreams, of course, are especially difficult, partly because they're so strange, right? So what do we know about dreams? So yes, as the title implies, there's really been sort of two distinct ways of thinking about what's going on in dreams. The first one is not very scientific or not very positive, as Perez called it, and that's the Freudian approach. And the second one is a much more cognitive, much more positivist approach, as Perez says. So let's start here, though. One of the challenges of studying dreams is that when we're dreaming, we almost have a completely different stew of neurotransmitters in our brain than when we're awake. And in fact, the process of waking up, what we call that, waking up, or in fact going to sleep, either one, is the changing of those neurochemicals. We literally need to go from an awake set of neurochemicals to an asleep set to go to sleep, and then we need to change it back when we wake up. And that process, that transition is waking up, and we feel that. And when it comes to dreams, the interesting thing, of course, is that as the chemicals change, as we lose the sleep chemicals, the dream seems to go with them. Right? As this waking up happens, the dream fades into the background. And so if we want to see a dream, if we want some sense, first of all, this isn't as scientific as we like, but we have to ask the dreamer what they were dreaming. That's the only way we can know. So it's what we call a subjective measure. That's not optimal. But secondly, we also need to teach them to do this right away. And so if you're interested in your dreams, you need a dream journal sitting by your bed. And the moment you wake up, you need to note what your dreams were about. And what a lot of these journals will say is you should have a very organized way of doing that. So here's some, what was the date? What was the dream title? Where was it? So I wouldn't worry about these things initially, because first of all, you got the dream in your head. So you got to try to get the details of the dream out. You can put your date and dream title down later. But that's the idea. You have a very limited time to kind of hold on to that dream. And try to remember what you can about it, and then it goes away. And so that's already part of the challenge, right? A, it's a subjective measure, and B, it's a noisy subjective measure. It disappears on us really quickly. So that's from a scientific perspective. On the measurement side, we're like, this data isn't as good as we would like it to be. What about on the theory side? On the theory side, there are these two approaches. So much, of course, with Freud we can get into in a lot of detail, and I won't get into it in a lot of detail, other than to say he thought there were these three sort of components to us. The id, which is like the it, the sort of primitive part of us that wants what it wants and wants it now. So this is where Freud thought a lot of the sexual and aggressive drives originated. The superego, which is in our mind, this vision of the perfect us from a society perspective, the us we wish everybody saw us as. And we can never quite reach that, but this is this goal we have about the perfect us that we wish everybody saw us as. And then there's the ego, and this is sort of conscious, the conscious part of us, and it's constantly trying to satisfy the id in ways that don't compromise the superego. So it's playing referee and trying to say, I know this id wants something right now, but I can't just do what it wants. So let's be specific. Let's say my boss is really annoying me, and the it in me wants me to hit my boss, to be aggressive towards my boss. But if I do that, everyone's going to think I'm a bad person, a mean person. So I can't just hit my boss, because then my superego will, I won't be fitting that. I'll feel embarrassed. It's a bad thing to do. And so I find other ways of sneakily making my boss's life difficult, maybe. And so that's my way of being aggressive. So I show some sort of passive aggression where, he wants me at some meeting and I say, oh, I'm sorry, I can't be at that meeting because of whatever. But really, I'm just trying to annoy my boss because I can't actually hit him. So this is the sort of stories that Freud would tell. Okay. Now, importantly, for any form of issue somebody had, he thought the source of that issue was some unconscious intrapsychic conflict. There's something that the id wants that it's not getting, and that you're sort of suppressing this need or suppressing this desire. And that leads to this conflict, and the conflict leads to all these problems in your behavior. And so what the therapist is trying to do is to work with you to figure out what this conflict is. It's unconscious, so you don't know what it is. But he's trying to work with you to figure out what it is. And the whole basis of psychoanalysis is we need to figure that out in order to help you. Freud thought, when it came to dreams, that dreams provided a window into the unconscious mind. He thought, if you want to know what's going on in that unconscious part of the brain, then the dreams are the place to look. Because his theory was, normally when we're awake and conscious, then these unconscious desires are kept out of our consciousness. There's like a bouncer that says, no, I don't want to accept that I'm that primitive kind of person, that I have those primitive desires. I'm not going to entertain that thought of me that way. But the claim was, when you sleep, that sort of conscious bodyguard, that bouncer, gets a little more relaxed, and it lets things come into consciousness that it wouldn't otherwise allow in. But still, those things have to be disguised. Okay, you still can't see your naked conscious desire or unconscious desire. It gets sort of symbolized somehow. It gets wrapped up in symbols. And so Freud had this book, The Interpretation of Dreams. And the whole idea here was he would ask people to recount their dreams, to keep a dream journal, recount their dreams, and then basically say, he would look at them and he would interpret what that dream actually meant, what it told him about that person's unconscious. And this is that sort of mystical, at least on the psychology side, the mystical side where it's like, oh, your dreams tell us something about who you are and what you really want, the real you. And so that's kind of interesting and cool. It led a lot of people to want to analyze their dreams. And this is the critical distinction now that we get with Freud. He would talk about the manifest content, what you actually dreamed, right? So if I said, what were you dreaming? You would tell me your dream. And that's what he called the manifest content. But then he would try to figure out the hidden meaning. What does that manifest? So if you had a dream I was falling, well, maybe that implies that you have a severe fear of heights. Maybe it feels like your life is out of control. Maybe it feels like you're giving in the temptation of some sort. And so he would take those things and he would think about this and try to figure out what it meant. Critically, one of the things I want to say here is Freud himself thought you really had to know the person to do this interpretation. So for example, you can go online and you can find the Dream Interpretation Dictionary. And it will tell you all of these things that might appear in your dream and what they might mean, what sort of suggestion they might hold for you. Freud himself would have said, this is not right. This is not true. What eggs might mean in Steve's dream might be very different from what eggs would mean in your dream. And in order for a therapist to truly interpret a dream, they have to know the person. They have to really understand that person in order to understand what those symbols mean. So Freud thought the interpretation of dreams was a very personal, individual thing you had to do. And so he would not say, oh, you can just note your dreams down and go online and find this dictionary and self figure out what your dreams are. He would say you could only do that with a therapist. Okay. Now, the point I want to make about Freud, and the point we make very often about Freud, is his writings are really interesting and fascinating, but they're not very scientific. They don't lead to testable predictions, which is what the scientific process is all about. And so the Freudian kind of view is very popular in the mainstream culture. People like this idea of interpreting dreams, and we see it come up in all sorts of things. But from a scientific perspective, it's never had a lot of traction because it's never been anything we could test directly. And instead, big red X. Instead, cognitive psychology has moved more towards this, what we call activation synthesis theory of dreams. So what does that mean? So I say random activation, but we want to be a little more clear about that as we go through. But let's say it this way. There's parts of our brain. So our brain is an electrochemical device. It does not turn off. When we go to sleep at night, our brain does not turn off. And we know that from those EEG signals, right? It's still firing. It's still sending signals. It slows down its rate of firing. So we get those slower, delta waves happening, but the brain is still active and doing things. And specifically the pons, which are a very primitive part of our brain, but very important for sleep regulation, they seem to be just stimulating other parts of the brain. They seem to be sending signals that light up various parts of the brain. I'm going to try to do a fun thing with you guys in a second if we can, but let's finish the story first of all. So we have these random things getting activated in the brain, and then we have this frontal lobe area that likes to make sense of stuff. It wants causal stories. It wants a nice ordered appreciation of things. And so what it's doing is trying to make sense of a bunch of random activation. And again, we're going to come back to the random activation part, but let me just see if I can get, sorry. I'm trying to get my chat window part going with this. I'm going to stop my share for a second just to get the chat up. Hopefully I can get over here and then I'll start my share again. Oh, now it says host disabled screen sharing again. Can you make me host again or whatever I need to? It's probably when you recorded. So I still have disabled screen sharing. That's okay. We can let's try this while the host figures out the screen sharing. On the chat, assuming you guys are allowed to chat, can I get a few of you guys just to write an English word, any word you want, just to write a word in the chat box. And once we have 5 or 6 words, we'll do it. But you are simulating the random activation. Okay, maybe your chat functionality is not. Okay, we have chat functionality. Excellent. So dream, health, a couple more maybe. Anybody? So you've just kind of gone. What's that guy? A dream within a dream. You've kind of got dream within a dream. Interesting. Give me some nouns. These are all great, but you guys are using what are called abstract words, which is fine. But dreams are full more of images. Okay, science a little better. Anybody want to give me just boring nouns? So we can start to do this. Laptop. There we go. Give me a few more of those. Maybe a place. Give me a name of a place. you'll get the idea, which I'll try to do. Calcutta, thank you. I'll try to do with these things. Elephant, thank you. There we go. Now we're talking. So, imagine these are things in the brain. So interesting is kind of hard to imagine, just the concept of interesting being lit up in the brain, because it's an abstract kind of concept. But the idea is these things are getting activated. Trump, yes, and no longer in power. Woo-hoo. Anyway, that's just me. And so the idea would be, let's just take what we see right here. And I'm going to stop right here. We'll do the ones I have here: laptop, Calcutta, elephant, Trump, river. And so you can just imagine that as the brain is getting this, it suddenly thinks of a laptop, and then it thinks of Calcutta. And so suddenly you're sitting in Calcutta somewhere with a laptop on your lap, and an elephant walks by, and that elephant has Donald Trump on the back of it. And Donald says, "Hey, how you doing?" But as he says that, he actually slips and falls into a river. Okay, so the idea is the sensical part of the brain tries to take these sort of random things that get activated and sews them together into some sort of story that's as sensical as it can be. But because these things are just sort of independent, separate things, the story is always going to end up being a little absurd. It's going to be a little, ridiculous, because we have to jump from one thing to something very independent. And so often that makes the dream seem strange or odd. But the claim is it's just this random activation. Now, let me qualify that a little bit. Not just random activation. The notion is the events of your day, the things on your mind, might be more likely to be active. So things you've run into during the day, things you've thought about, etc., that they are what we might call primed. They're quite ready to be reactivated. And so with a little bit of activation from the pawns, they might be more likely to come to mind. Now, this view of dreams is now the more common because it's scientifically testable. Here's an example. I'll get rid of the chat for now, where there's previous, by the way, just to show this previous research, pre-sleep suggestions influence nocturnal dream content. So scientifically now, if you think of this, we can expose people to certain concepts like elephant, laptop, Calcutta, before they go to bed. We could give them a list of items, or we could show them pictures of various things, and then they go to sleep, and then we wait for them to dream. And when we wake them up, we will see from the previous research that those things that we primed are more likely to appear in the dreams. So that elephant, if we had the word elephant, there's more likely to be an elephant in the dream. So we can kind of prime dreams a little bit. And what this particular study says is if there's something that's also currently on our mind, a current concern that we have, if we prime that, if we kind of make people think about that before they go to sleep, then they're really likely to come into the dreams. So it's not really random activation in the brain. There's a random component to it, but it's also a reflection of things we've been thinking about, things we've interacted with. And so this is more boring than the Freudian notion, but the claim is those things become active, and that part of our brain that wants to make sense of things synthesizes them. So activation, synthesis, that also allows us to do studies of things like dream bizarreness and the activation synthesis hypothesis. And so looking at this notion of why dreams are so bizarre, and trying to come at that thing scientifically. So that's kind of where we are. I wanted to kind of take you through this story that interacts, between science and the scientific approach in psychology, and this really challenging issue of what is sleep for, what are dreams all about? And as you see, and this is the case often in psychology, we don't have the answers yet. That's what makes psychology kind of fun and interesting. It's a new, young science, and often it's about trying to figure out how to answer a question. But this is sort of where we've gotten to. We know both sleep and dreams are critical, and we're getting some idea of what's going on in there, but a whole lot more research left to do. So I'm going to stop the talk there, other than to say, it's morning for me, but I know it's getting on to evening for you. So I wish you all a good night's sleep and good dreams after all this. If you have any questions, let's chat a little bit now. And if there are any questions that I don't answer now, there's my email. Please feel free to send me an email with any questions you have after the talk as well. Cool. Perez.
Thank you so much, Steve, for that very interesting session. I think we can now open the talk for questions if they have any. I do have a couple of questions which I would like to ask, but if anyone else has any questions, please please feel free to ask them.
I'll also mention that I have the chat open, so if you're more comfortable asking a question in the chat, that's fine as well.
So Steve, I had a couple of questions. So one question that I had was, this is the cognitive psychology explanation of why do we dream, right? This particular hypothesis resides within the field of cognitive psychology. As you've seen, within the field of psychology, there is a growing consensus that evolutionary theory may actually be very useful for explaining a variety of phenomena, right? And from an evolutionary standpoint, dreams are in some sense slightly thorny an issue, right? Because do they have some function, so as to why has the process of natural selection preserved this particular phenomena of dreaming, right? Now, this particular cognitive perspective, which you explained, which is, these are random activations which happen, and then, the part of the brain tries to synthesize those, and that is what dream is, right? But how do you layer it with, an evolutionary undergrounding? How do you, explain these random activations from an evolutionary standpoint, or considering that also a lot of mammals have this have dreams? It's not just, it's not a human-centered phenomena. A lot of mammals also dream. For instance, cats and dogs, they also dream. They also have non-REM stages of sleep. So, from an evolutionary standpoint, what function does the dream serve? Any interesting takes on that? So this is the first question.
Yeah. So, I mean, always a fun thing to think about. I'll begin by cautioning people sometimes about evolution theories because they're very powerful. So just as a taste for sleep, I remember hearing two very different evolutionary stories when I first started trying to understand more about sleep. One person said, hey, we spend a third of our day in this state. It must be really critical. It must be doing something during that time that's absolutely important for our survival in order for it to evolve. Otherwise, we would have evolved to not sleep at all, perhaps. That seems like, wow, if we could be awake 24 hours a day, wouldn't that be an advantage? And so this first person said, no, there must be something really good happening that's better than that advantage, or we wouldn't do it. And then I heard another person argue, no, that's not true at all. All sleep is an energy conservation mode, that if we were awake 24 hours a day, we would burn energy 24 hours a day. But in our ancestors' day, you couldn't do anything productive in the nighttime because of our sensory organs. We're no good outside. We're just ready to be victimized by anything if we're out in the dark. And so the claim was that sleep was just energy conservation. It was just a way to not consume as much energy while we can't do anything effective anyway. So just to say that one thing, you have some people doing an evolutionary theory saying sleep is absolutely critical, and other people saying it's just energy conservation. And both of those kind of make sense. So always, I like to say, if you hear an evolutionary story, it's fun, it's interesting, but you can tell a lot of evolutionary stories about a lot of things, and so they on itself shouldn't be all that impressive. However, dreams and getting to your point with dreams. Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say from that dream. we got a bit of a delay, I think. So I'm sorry. I'll be careful to leave more of a delay after I speak. But with respect to dreams specifically.
Yeah, my bad. So.
No, you go ahead.
No, so Steve, my only question was, they are sometimes criticized for being just so stories, right? Evolutionary theories. I mean, you can explain both sides, as you said, using an evolutionary paradigm, right? And yet, the cognitive theory which you explained explains the how of it. Do you think it explains the why of it?
Well, I think it's getting there. And I think as close as we're coming to the why right now is some of that learning stuff I briefly told you about, because that process that we call consolidation, it's very mystical. We don't understand it very well, but we know that our sleep is very important to our ability to learn during the day. So during the day we have all of these things that happen, and we interact with things, and we activate various concepts, etc. And then it seems as though at night our brain reorganizes that information in some way, maybe adding the new information in an organized and structured way to previous information. So we know, for example, that the hippocampus, which is part in the middle of the brain and which is very important for memory, the hippocampus is very active at night. It's generating things in our brain, and so that is the notion that we have right now. It's as close as we come to why dreams are critical. And when we look at the deprivation data, it seems as though if we're constantly exposed to new information and we're not given the opportunity to kind of integrate it with our existing information, then we start to overload or something. These hallucinations start to happen. And so I think as close as we have an explanation, it is one of adding new learning on top of old learning, but to keep us in a sort of stable place in terms of interacting with the environment. And it seems like if we don't get that, we fall into this instability. But still, I mean, I'm still a far cry away from giving you what you want, which is a good evolutionary story of why it's helpful. But that's sort of where we are. Yeah. Let me quickly read. So for the last 2 to 3 years after I wake up, I started to Google about my dreams, and there are dream interpretation websites that give some meaning. Yes, there are. Freud himself would not be impressed, but yeah. And often to my surprise, they are most of the times correctly guessing my state of mind at the time of the dream. For instance, a dream where I see my teeth are falling off, which indicates underconfidence or some happy dreams. How much do you think these sites are correct? Like you mentioned, is it harmful? So, everything we suggest is not, suggests that this is not correct. There's some interesting work on horoscopes, those associated with what month you were born. And people say based on your month, this astrology thing, we can tell you a lot about you. And there's a study where they've given everybody their horoscope for the day. And they say, how accurate was this? And what parts of that horoscope accurately described you? And people by and large said that the descriptions were very good, and they could pick out certain things that are very much like them. The interesting part of the story is they gave everybody the same horoscope. So it didn't matter what your actual birth thing was, you saw that same writing, and you could still see things in there that seemed accurate and that fit. And so very often when somebody like a dream analysis says, here's what things are about, or if we go to a mystic and they tell us all these various things, the things they say that don't make sense, we don't think about too much. We just discount those. But the things they say that seem to fit or that make sense, they impress us very much, and they grab our attention, and we go, yeah, there, that's it. And so we're left with the feeling like, maybe only 1 out of 10 of these interpretation things sort of fit with you, but those 1 out of 10 feel really powerful. And the 9 out of 10 that didn't really fit, you don't even really pay attention to. And so you're left feeling like, wow, that was really impressive. But that would be the cognitive interpretation. And I know that's kind of taking the fun out of some of this stuff, but that's the sort of cognitive approach. What's your take on daydreams? What is the scientific rationale behind them? So unfortunately, we don't daydream as much as we used to because we have all these other distractions. So we spend our time being pulled X and Y and Z. But yeah, back in my day, we didn't have a phone. And so if you were in a boring lecture, you went into your head, right? That was the only other place to go. You couldn't go anywhere else. So we would spend a lot of time and our mind would be drawn somewhere else. So part of daydreams is just an inability to sustain attention on especially something that doesn't seem too relevant or interesting for you. And so a more relevant, more interesting thought can pull your mind away, and you can start sort of following that. So daydreams are often seen, and this is an interesting question for dreams in general, as really important for creativity. They're seen as reflecting what we call a diffuse approach to thought, where rather than focusing and trying to really understand things, rather than focusing all your attention on some singular idea or issue, you get much more diffuse. You let your brain kind of activate almost this random activation thing, a number of different things, and kind of stitch them together. And the idea is, this is where a lot of creative ideas come from, and creativity in general, seeing the world a different way. And so daydreaming may play that role, and maybe dreaming plays that role too. Maybe it allows us a little bit more flexibility in how we think about the things we're encountering, than our usual focused approach. There hasn't been a lot of research on daydreams. There is a lot of research on mind wandering when people read. So this is just to kind of reattach this back to the science of psychology. Daydream, you can't really tell when someone's daydreaming, right? And so how do you study daydreaming? You can't really tell them either. Okay, go daydream right now. It's hard to study scientifically, but what we do have is something called eye trackers. And so we can study people as they read, and we can watch their eyes literally as they go through and read things. And what we can find is patterns of what we call mind wandering, where we will see the eyes doing a very specific thing as the person is reading. But then when they stop paying attention too much to what they're reading, and they are probably daydreaming, right? Their mind is going somewhere else. We see the way that their eyes are scanning changes. And so we can detect that they are now mind wandering. And so that's another example of how having that apparatus, having the eye tracker, has allowed us now to kind of identify, okay, this state is now beginning. And so we're learning a little bit about mind wandering and how long it takes people to come back on track and things like that. But we're still not really into the substance of what's happening in their mind. But at least we can detect it, kind of like we could detect when a dream started. And that's often the first step to studying something. So it's kind of cool there. We sometimes dream of things that we have not consciously thought of during the day. How does that work? There's a really impressive video I wish I could show you quickly, by Darren Brown. I'm going to type his name here because it's spelled kind of odd. I think, and I may get it wrong, but it's something like this. And if you do subliminal, so I'm just going to tell you the story of this video. And I think advertising. If you look for this on YouTube, you will find this fascinating video. And here's what he does. He has these advertising executives, and he's eventually going to bring them to his office. But he makes them drive down this path that he's intentionally set up on the way to the office. And as they drive, they go by certain things, and they often have, they're at a stoplight. So they're stopped. And for example, at one of these stoplights, there's a zoo to the left, and there's the gates of the zoo are sitting there. And then a little further on, they see something else where there's a statue with a big set of wings behind the back. I don't think that's true, by the way, but I'm going to make that up for this one. And so eventually they get to this advertising agency, and Darren Brown is this guy, and he's going to guess what they're thinking before they do it, which is what makes it kind of cool. Okay, excellent. Kranthi has the link there. And he asks them, he gives them a problem. He says, pretend I'm a business owner, and pretend my business is stuffed animals, animals after they're dead, and we stuff them and bring them back to life. And I want you to make an ad for me for that. Come up with a slogan, come up with an image, etc. And so these guys brainstorm for a while, and they come up with these gates to heaven with a bear that's got, and there was a bear on the way with wings on the back. And basically they come up with this thing that they just thought they just created. And he says, oh, that's very interesting. Let me show you what I thought you were going to draw. And he comes up with something that was in a sealed envelope that looks almost exactly the same. And they're like, oh my goodness, how did you know what we were going to draw? And he says, because I primed all these things. Okay, so it's almost like the activation synthesis. It's like I made sure you saw all these things, and you probably didn't consciously see them. You probably didn't really think about those gates. But I exposed you to all of these things that would be related to the task that I would give you. And then when I gave you the task, I knew those things that I just primed would still be sort of active in your mind. And what you would do is try to bring those together, synthesis, for the task at hand, and produce something. And because I gave you all the raw data bits, the bear, the gates, the wings, the harp, there was a harp or something like that, I knew what you would create out of them. I was pretty clear. So that's a really nice video to almost think of the same process of things that do get activated unconsciously in a person's mind as they go through a day. but then those things becoming active. So in dreams, it's at night, but in this advertising thing, it's while they're kind of brainstorming, and then gets synthesized into something that makes sense. That video is a good sort of encapsulation of the activation and synthesis notion of the brain. I know we're tight for time and I do have another meeting, but let me just see if I can hit this one as the last one, if that's okay, from Hamadri. The cliche often goes, dream big, positive, fantasize about, say, a success of a project. Can you engineer a dream? I mean, you guys should really look at what's called, oh my goodness, I'm losing it. You can't, so a lot of people talk about when they wake up that they can stay in the dream state, so they don't completely wake up, and they can actually shape the dream. It's called a lucid dream. There it is, lucid dreaming. So if you look at lucid dreaming, the claim is you can teach yourself how to do this. And when I went through the story of how you can teach it, it makes sense. It might be doable. I've never tried. But the claim is you can sort of take control of your dreams and have fun to some extent. You can engineer your dreams. And yeah, engineering anything in your mind, by the way, thinking positive thoughts. Athletes, before they go in some event, if they imagine themselves succeeding, imagine themselves doing really well, we call it visual motor behavioral rehearsal, then they tend to do better. And so certainly I agree, this dreaming big, dreaming positive, having that positive mindset. And if you could bring that in through lucid dreaming, that could be very powerful. Lucid dreaming has really rich imagery, so it would feel more real to you, and it would probably, have a powerful effect. Cool. Fantastic, guys. I really appreciate the time and the chance to interact. I welcome your questions through email. I do have to skip to another meeting. It's 10 a.m. for me. I know you guys are off to bed. So thank you for your attention, and I do wish you all a good sleep and good dreams tonight. See you guys.
Thank you, Professor Steve. That was a very, very interesting and engaging session. Thanks a lot for accepting our invite. And I'm very sure the session left us with many more questions, because dreams is a very interesting topic. And you exposed us to some very interesting ideas, for instance, subliminal advertising, lucid dreaming, and activation synthesis hypothesis, which looks to be a very promising interpretation of dream. So thanks a lot for coming here and interacting with us. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Thank you all. And stay safe, everyone, during these crazy days.